Welcome to A&N In Depth. In the last episode, we were discussing digital strategy and how to make sense of our structure and how to honor our structure without allowing it to hinder our mission, especially when it comes to innovation. In this episode, we'll talk about the local church. After all, everything related to digital strategy involves people becoming Seventh-day Adventist and joining us in trying to proclaim this message to 8 billion people. So what is the relationship with digital strategy and the local church? To discuss this, welcome, Richard Stephenson. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much, Pastor Sam. I'm thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Richard, you are an associate treasurer of the General Conference, but you're a pastor.
Yes.
Which means you live in between these two parts of your heart. Right? And I've come to know your heart recently. You are a pastor first and foremost, which means you want to see the transformation of people as they fall in love with Jesus.
That's right.
And die to themselves and are reborn as children of God.
That's exactly right.
And on the other hand, you have been tasked to lead the digital strategy of the Adventist Church globally, at least for the General Conference, which has an impact globally.
That's right.
This means the bridge between the world church and the local church lives within you. How do you navigate the abstract 40,000-foot view with your desire to see lives transformed on the ground level?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that everything we do, we have to remember that local pastor in that local faith community, and what is the relevance to him or her? What is the relevance of what we're doing? Are we relevant to the mission and message of that local church? And that's the first question we have to ask ourselves. And it should be the recurring question that we ask for every bit of infrastructure, every initiative that we have, and every innovation that we explore. It must revolve around the relevancy of the local church.
Over the last few years, we've been trying to see what works best from a digital perspective to that local church. And we've met some tension because, yes, we can build relationships online, but these are relationships with the world church. How has it been, the connection with the local church, when you cast the net around the world?
Well, I would, and Pastor Sam, I would say that you have probably the most experience within our world church in this area. So I would like to turn the question around and ask the real expert.
I would like to tell you that it's not been easy. Local churches are not ready to welcome visitors. It's difficult to get hold of anyone in the local church when you come from the world church. And that's the failure in the system. And there's no other way to put it. It is a failure. When you have someone who contacted you and you're providing pastoral care to them, they trust you, they're doing Bible studies with you, and you want to lead them to a local church, and then people arrive at the local church and no one talks to them.
Yeah.
Or we couldn't get hold of anybody to welcome them. And they come in, they come out and say, well, it's common for people to say, it's a very different experience to what I have here to what I saw there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have local churches that would be very welcoming if only they had visitors. So they're waiting for people to come, and no one comes to church anymore in that directly.
And I think they would be very welcoming if they understood what it is the world church is trying to do. How did this visitor arrive at my door? Who's been interacting with them? What is that handoff, if you will? That's kind of a awkward term, but how do we make that connection with the local church? These are issues that we have to wrestle with, because the vineyard that God has called us to minister to is increasingly digital. It's online. This is where we can make these connections with people But the only way the connections are sustained, the only way that the connection continues on, is for them to get grounded in a local church, in a local faith community, and to be active locally, not just on a keyboard, but to meet and experience a faith family, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That is the great struggle. And I would say one lesson that I think that I've learned, this is just in the very short time that we've been working together, Pastor Sam, is that we need to bring the local church along with us. And that local church includes the structure that is there to support that local church, which of course means we're talking about conference and union and division. But we need to bring them along with us so that it is not what we are doing, we as in the GC, but it is what the Adventist Church is doing. It's more inclusive, if you will. So what does that look like? What does that look like? I'm going to ask myself that question. What does that look like? Ideally, this is what that looks like. Someone from the local faith community, from the church or from the company that's doing a local evangelistic series. And let's say that we're using one of our social media channels to advertise for that local evangelistic series. We need someone, not just someone, but we need a team from that local church, I believe, who can interact along with us with the people that are clicking the ad to learn more information. When they click that ad, they're essentially opening their digital front door to us. And we need to ensure that our local communities, our local faith communities, are part of that conversation with them, so that when they do show up on the doorstep on Sabbath morning, there's someone from that community that says, I know you. I was on the other end of the line.
I've been waiting for you.
That's exactly right. I've been praying for you. There's a celebration in heaven because you're here. And I believe that connection only happens when it's not I'm doing this or the GC is doing this, but when the Adventist Church does this. We use the reach that the world church can provide, but that reach has to be grounded locally. It has to be sending our church members locally to be enveloped in a faith community.
We have been testing many prototypes as part of the Digital Evangelism Initiative here at the General Conference. So this means we test our assumptions of what works and what doesn't. The first one was that we tested organic content in building relationships. And it had some success, but nothing compared to ads. Organic content, at least on Instagram and Facebook, it reaches your audience and their friends and family. Okay, so that's as far as it reaches. And our World Church page has about 1.4 million followers at the moment. So we regularly reach about 8 to 10 million people every month. And many of them send their prayer requests and initiate an online pastoral care relationship just from the organic content. We do not differentiate between Adventists and non-Adventists.
Yeah.
We provide online pastoral care to everyone. Then we tried ads, and we tried multiple types of ads. We tried offering advertising events, digital or physical events. We tried to advertise books for free. We try to advertise health content, health websites, and so on. We try to advertise mental health stuff as well. We tried all sorts of ads. By far, the best ad at building relationships, meaningful relationships, was offering prayer.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we started to offer prayer, that resonated with people very much. So we received about 2 million prayer requests over the last few years. Probably now much more. This is a few months old data. We stopped counting after 2 million.
Praise the Lord.
So to the prayer requests. But the system failed. So you see, we're trying one step at a time, learning what works. Okay, so prayer ads work. We build long-term relationships, but we can't connect people to the local church. And then one local church in New Zealand offered to test whether advertising locally and providing pastoral care locally worked. And that worked very well. It's what you are saying. So with $250, they initiated 54, many more than that. I don't know exactly how many relationships they initiated, but out of those, 54 people visited the local church.
Yeah, praise the Lord.
Now, this was a miracle to them. They'd never seen anything like it. So it was wonderful. They started to do evangelistic
What a
series.
harvest.
What a harvest, yeah. Jesus was right. The harvest is
plentiful.
Yeah. The workers are few. And we discovered the workers are few when we tried our next prototype in Fortaleza, Brazil, because the church members could not keep up with the number of new people that were wanting prayer and those relationships there. So the conference hired a few people just to offer that pastoral care that the local church members did not have enough time to provide properly. Then we tried, our next prototype was in London, and it failed miserably. We couldn't get the ads to perform well. Not enough people were sending prayer requests. It was costing something like $90 per person that contacted us. Yeah. So we paused it until we figured out what happened. The next prototype was in Moema in São Paulo, and you've met some of the people that were impacted by this. What was your experience meeting the people that received these prayer requests?
In June, I was blessed to be in Hortalandia. I'm probably mispronouncing that, Pastor Sam. I was very fortunate to be there at an event where on stage we were able to meet 6 individuals.
6.
That came to know Jesus as their Savior through this online evangelism, if you will. And that was an incredibly special moment. Not just special for me as a participant, but it was special to see our church succeed in digital evangelism and connecting them with a local police officer that was a mighty prayer warrior, that took his time as a local church member, a volunteer, took his time to pray with these individuals, to make connections with these individuals, and to invite them into a local faith community. It was powerful, and it was a foretaste, I believe. It was the I can't think of the word now. It was the snack before the meal that I believe the Lord is preparing His church to have.
The starters.
That's right. The starter course. It was the soup before the main course is served.
Yes.
I believe this is our path forward on digital evangelism. And that harvest of 6 souls, I believe that is a blueprint for how we can move forward in a way that we can be relevant to the local church, and we can be a part of the ministry that the local pastor is leading there.
Yeah, and we learned a lot there.
Yeah.
So it's the most expensive ad space in South America. We initiated 3,800 relationships between March and June, so 4 months. And out of those, 112 visited the church. A number of them joined small groups, and many have been baptized as a consequence. Now, everything is local in that sense. It's the World Church channel is the page where the ads happen.
Yeah.
And then the local teams there provide the ongoing pastoral care. So when people visit the church on a Wednesday night prayer meeting, they meet their prayer warrior
who
will invite them to their home, who will create those connections. And it's incomparable to anything that church has ever experienced. It's a church of 800 members, so it's not a provincial church. It's in the center of São Paulo, but they've never experienced anything like this, and neither have we.
Yeah.
So the next prototype.
Well, and let me just pause you briefly and say, of those contacts, a seed was planted in every single one of them.
It's long-term relationships. We're
That's
still in
exactly
relationship
right.
with 3,800 people.
And the wonderful thing is that the growing and the nurturing, the Holy Spirit takes care of that. We do the planting, if you will. We co-labor with Christ in doing the planting, if you will. He takes care of what happens after that seed is planted. And who knows but Jesus?
Yeah.
How many of those people will come to know him? And maybe they're not in the next few months stepping foot into an Adventist church, but maybe they're getting to know Jesus in the quiet time of their morning. We can't track that,
Right.
but God tracks it, and God understands what happens with all of those people that had a connection through that event. And we praise the Lord for that.
It's beautiful. Next, we are now tackling California. And boy, was that a journey. Man, when we started the ads, we thought it was going to be much easier than it was. It started with $250 for one relationship.
Wow.
In São Paulo, it was at first $10, and then it stabilized between $2 and $250 per relationship. And in California, it was awful at first. The ads that we had used elsewhere just did not work.
No.
So we had to revisit the ads, and the creative team just reading about the people of Fresno, reading about what kind of person lives in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Because the prototype there is digital evangelism using the platforms that were created and are ran by Silicon Valley. You see, it's we're reaching the people behind the platforms that we use elsewhere. There is a poetry to this. And more recently, we have discovered a few things that we learned in California. For those difficult places, more affluent places, we need to use the local church pages. We need to use the local church pastor to be on the ad, offering prayer. We need to use in the background of the videos and images key places from within those towns.
Yeah.
And we need to test multiple ads constantly. So now in California, some of the ads are performing at around $1 or $2. Others are still around $6, $7. But it's not $250.
Yeah. Well, and this underscores the necessity of partnering with our local institutions, partnering in this case with the North American Division, partnering with the union, the conference, to understand what is the relevance locally. What is relevant locally? And this is where if the GC were to come in and to say, cookie cutter, this works here, it'll work here, you just do it.
We learned that does not work.
And to be honest with you, it almost smacks of an arrogance that can be felt locally. And what we want to do is we want to say, tell us what is working. And then we can partner with them to create these ads to make sure that they are relevant and engaging to the local community and with the challenges that exist locally in that community. Well, and those challenges are different, are very diverse,
yes,
depending on where we're at. And so this is why it's so critical for us to partner with the division in question and to make sure that we're all on the same page. That can slow down the progress, if you will. But it is so critical for us to do our own due diligence in doing that, because that helps to ensure that what we're doing is really relevant. And I think that's one of the takeaways we've learned over the last couple years.
This puts the role of the GC as the research and development lab for digital evangelism.
Which I love.
I love that too.
I love that. And what that allows us to do is to share with our divisions, our institutions, our ministries. This is our experience. This is our story. This is what we've experienced. This is what has worked for us. This is what has not worked for us. And we share that not in a way that is prescriptive. You do X, Y, and Z in this community, and you do P, D, and Q in that community. Not prescriptive, but in a way that is collaborative and respects and uplifts the local leadership and the local environment there. And so I think that approach, if you will, is I believe that's what works, and that's what's very exciting.
The structure of the church has an ascending responsibility and descending liability. Let me explain. So a local church does not have an HR department to pay the pastor and take care of things. No, the conference does. The conference absorbs the responsibility of payroll for the pastors and so on. The conference absorbs the responsibility of property management and so on. So the conference absorbs many responsibilities that the local church does not need to, and therefore can be free to do its mission.
That's right.
Similarly, the union absorbs much of the responsibility from the conferences, so they don't have to.
Yeah.
In some unions, you have television channels being managed by the union.
That's right.
They have universities that are managed by the union, which means that a local church or a conference does not need to
They're
think about
entirely relieved
creating that. So there is a progression. In terms of funding for research and development of digital evangelism methods, if we are going to there's an expression that you open the way. You know, you're like a pathfinder, if you not quite, but you are opening the way. You're trailblazing. If somebody needs to figure out what works best and what questions to ask and what kind, and the General Conference is absorbing that responsibility for research and development of digital missions. Because of the nature of digital having no geographical bounds, that makes perfect sense. And I think, Richard, that we need to do a better job, and I say we, I mean you and me mainly, of publishing our learning.
Yes.
We don't have a methodology yet for publishing our learning, and that's something that we need to do better of.
And we need to be systematic about doing that. Intentional, recurring, systematic in communicating that.
This is the prototype. This is what our expectations, our hypothesis. We noticed this did not work. We adapt. This is our agile process through this prototype.
Yeah.
You know, a video and a little booklet that explains that. And then anybody can read it. Can you imagine somebody in Asia says, they tried this. It did not work. This is why my thing is not working here.
Yeah.
Maybe I should try this differently. So the documentation of all of this, so far it's been just us discussing and struggling through it and debating. But I think I would love to see in the next few months us moving toward this more transparent learning to the world church, showing what worked and what didn't.
It is my dream that here at the GC, for the meetings we have at annual council and spring meetings, that we have an opportunity to share this with our colleagues, and that be built into the schedule. This is what we're actually working on now, working with Secretariat to allot time, especially for DEI, time to be able to share. These are the projects, not in any way looking for applause.
80% of what we do is failure. So, you know, if you take California, we cracked it. If you take the few months of the project, we're not there yet, but as soon as you notice that something's not working, you change. So when I present on the prototypes, often is 80% of the presentation is everything that we noticed did not work and how we adapted to
Yeah.
help it to work.
You mentioned agile a few minutes ago, and one of the key concepts of agile frameworks, agile project management, is that your successive failures become smaller and smaller in scope because you've learned by what that failure taught you, and you incorporate that in the next iteration of the project.
Right.
And so your failures, they become more and more targeted because you get more and more information. This is what works. And to be honest with you, trailblazing is what we need to do in the digital space. No one's done this before, not in our church. And so if we don't do it, who does? I believe, and I mentioned this in a previous episode with you, Pastor Sam, I believe for just such a time as this, God has assembled this team to work in this environment for us to move this forward. And I believe that's the great responsibility that he's placed upon the GC is to foster an environment where, and this sounds challenging, awkward perhaps, where it's okay to fail. As we learn from those failures and we incorporate what we've learned into the next round as we seek engagements with people online.
So maintaining the same mistakes is not okay.
No, that's exactly
so
right.
failing the same way constantly
And that
is not
would
okay.
and that would be an epic failure. Is to maintain the same set of failures.
Yeah.
And I think that
there are many new questions that we need to tackle, I think, over the next few months or years. One, we've begun to really dive deeper into what it means to have a digital church or an online church.
Yeah.
Because during COVID, all of our in the places that had lockdowns, our churches existed only online. What does that mean?
Yeah. What does it mean for membership?
Yeah. Can you have remote membership?
Yeah.
How do you have, hybrid churches that exist? What if you're the only one that is an Adventist and there's no church near you? What does that look like for you?
Yeah.
So all of
Is there a conference church then in that scenario?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Are they competing, if you will?
What if tithe is given by somebody who doesn't live in that country but is sent through? I mean, there are so many questions there that we're tackling at the moment. There is also the question, and it's an important question, what do we do with full-time employees of the church, full-time church workers, who are also content creators and are monetizing their content? What do we do with that?
Yeah.
Is that managed by the person directly? Is it by the church? Because they're receiving a full-time salary to work generally as pastors or Bible workers. But they have a very successful ministry online, and that's generating resources.
And the reality is we have very established protocols and policies for book revenues.
But we have nothing on digital.
But we have nothing on digital.
Yeah. So this is going to only get worse. What if they create they go down the road of online courses? So not only is their content monetized, the videos that people watch on YouTube and so on, but also the online courses. So there are a lot of conversations that are happening, but usually through the lenses of risk aversion, right? This is a risk. This is a risk. We need to stop this. We need to stop this. No, we need to empower every creative to reach as many people as possible.
That's right.
Because that's the mission. But we do need to take care of these administrative things. And so what else do you see that are conversations that we will probably have over the next few years? I can't think of any other from the top of my head at the moment. Do you have any that you can think of?
I think the ones we've discussed are some of the most prominent right now. I think maybe one of the biggest challenges we have is a culture, and you hinted at it. We have a culture where we expect success on every single project. And we want to not to change the culture so that failure is doesn't mean anything, but we want to change the culture in a way that it is okay for us to try new things, and that the critical part of this, and this is where I think where we have maybe not been as effective historically, is how do we evaluate the continuing relevance of a platform, of an initiative, of a project?
When do we retire and kill it?
Yes, and that takes a culture change. That takes a change in thought. We love to create new, and we are challenged organizationally with retiring old. And so I was speaking with someone this morning. Sometimes we place projects on life support trying to maintain them.
Yep.
And sometimes that's out of a sense of personal pride with the project. Sometimes we get attached to the project, and sometimes we get confused about what the main thing is.
When Google started, this is the culture of tech in the early 2000s was to have really long beta software.
Yeah.
Right? So this is how you solved part of that problem. So first, if you have a culture where failure is the end of your career, you will keep throwing good money after bad because you will never want to end it. Right? You propose the project, it was approved, you're doing the project, you build the project on 3 assumptions that you made. It was the best knowledge anyone had at the time. And all of a sudden, those 3 assumptions are wrong. They do not match reality. The customers don't want that. The users are not blessed by this. No one's being transformed. But what do you do with the project now?
You know, I had back during my college days, I had a professor at Southern Adventist University. I'm doing a shout out for my alma mater.
That's all right.
We had a photography professor, and one of the things he told us, the difference between an amateur photographer and a professional photographer, the number one difference. And this guy was he was an established photographer, did a lot of newspaper work, a lot of article magazine work. He said the difference is an amateur takes 100 pictures and keeps everyone thinking that they're masterpieces. The professional takes 100 pictures and keeps 3. And of those 3, he uses those shots to inform his next round of shots, where he takes another 100 and he keeps maybe 2. And he keeps refining his work based on what's happened. And I love that iterative process. And so maybe the comparison I might make is, can we take that culture of thinking, that way of thinking, and incorporate that into digital ministry?
The next stage of this example I was giving would be, therefore, instead of voting the full project, let's identify what key assumptions you're making, and let's test those assumptions with a couple of $100 prototype.
Yeah.
That can just test this. Is this assumption solid? Would people use this? And how? And so on. So but that process is an iterative process where you develop your own instincts for what happens.
But before that funding is allocated, before that $200 is given per project, initiative, we have to have a metric to evaluate. What does success look like?
What do we want?
What do we want? What's our target?
Yeah.
And once we have that, once we have the target and the strategy for how we have identified that target, then we absolutely should be funding these initiatives. And the difference is, I'm going to take I'm going to take a few strands of spaghetti and throw it against the wall and see what sticks, if you will. Take that versus the alternative is I know which strands are going to stick. I have an indication based on my previous cooking of spaghetti. Boy, it seems like I'm talking about food in every single episode we've done, Pastor. But I'm going to take that spaghetti that I've cooked, and I know which one is done. I know it's al dente because when it's al dente, it's going to stick on the wall. And that comes from experience. That comes from trial and error, saying this spaghetti is too soft or this spaghetti is too hard. And
I think we should have extra images at this point of us trying to cook and throw spaghetti at a wall. That would significantly increase the entertainment value of this show. Yeah, it's not going to be easy. But I hope to call you again for another episode where we can discuss in more detail some of these iterative process that
looking
we are
forward to it.
taking people through. Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Sam.
And thank you for listening to A&N In Depth. It's been quite a journey in the last 2 episodes talking about digital strategy. And until we change the subject next week, we hope that you will enjoy this conversation and send to other people that are interested in finding out how the Adventist Church is looking at technology. If you disagree entirely, we want to hear from you. Just go ahead and go to YouTube, find this video on YouTube if you're listening on another platform, and type your comments. We want to keep this conversation as public as possible, as the chances of us being wrong are quite high, and we want to be less wrong tomorrow than we were yesterday. So please join this conversation by commenting on YouTube. We thank you again for joining us in every episode of A&N In Depth. We'll see you in the next one.